Namaskar. Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sree Iyer. Today we are going to be looking at a findings from a social perceptions lab out of Rutgers University and also a follow on that from Network Contagion Research Institute, also from Rutgers University. This has to do with DEI and DEI's impact on various factors of life. And for this particular study, they had looked at three things. The first one was race, the second one was religion, and the third one was caste. And it is caste that we are going to be talking about. What are the findings? Are they cause for concern? And where exactly is the American society headed? Is this DEI going to take root? And is it doing good or is it doing something much worse? In fact, you know that Boeing has completely dismantled its DEI program because their quality was suffering. So all this and more, we are going to have two guests today. Joining me is Suresh Krishnamoorthy from CoHNA as well as Sudha Jagannathan. Let's welcome the guests. Namaskaram Suresh ji, Namaskaram Sudha ji, how are you?
Namaskaram. Good to meet with you again, Sree ji.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I find it very interesting that all of us, our first names start with the letter S, Satyam Shivam Sundaram. So,
well, the Sundaram is to my right on the screen. So between the two of us, we can decide who's Satyam and who's Shivam then.
Thank you so much. And actually, the topic that we are going to be talking about today is very, very serious. Perceptions. How is America looking at caste? And in caste, are there portrayals that don't fit the reality, or do they fit the reality? All this and more. So Suresh and Sudhaji are going to dissect this. I'm going to yield the floor to you, Suresh, first, and then I'll come to you, Sudhaji. Sureshji, take it away. Tell us what you see in this report.
Namaskaram, and again, greetings to all your viewers. NCRI and the Social Perceptions Lab at Rutgers University did a joint survey, and the question they were really looking at was something very fundamental. They basically said, we have all these DEI programs that have been running for a very long time. Do DEI programs do what they're supposed to do? In other words, their goals are obviously very laudable. They want to increase awareness, they want to increase, cooperation, increase empathy, and so on. But we don't have any data on whether they actually do or not. So let's design an experiment and see what the impact of DEI programs are, or what the impact is on average Americans, right? So they basically designed an experiment with three facets to it. They looked at it at three levels. One was on race, the second was on religion, and the third was on caste. And in the report, they kind of interestingly point out that caste study provided them with kind of a unique opportunity because it's almost like a greenfield. If you take race and religion, there are a lot of people who have preformed opinions, right? There's a lot of information out there. People have already learned a lot about it and so on and so forth. But caste is relatively new. So the chances of finding somebody who doesn't know what this whole thing is actually much higher than finding someone on race or religion. So when they ran the experiment on caste, they kind of believed going in that the results are going to be a little more statistically significant primarily because you have a lot of greenfield. So first of all, some of the findings of the study are absolutely dramatic and shocking. And normally when you come up with something like this, the first question is, oh, how good is the study? I mean, who's doing it? Who funded it? Yada, yada, yada. Well, the Social Perceptions Lab is run by Professor Lee-Jussim. And Professor Jussim is kind of a legend in the area of social psychology. He's been doing this research for almost like 25, 30 years. And he's a very, very well-respected scientist in the field of social psychology. So I think we should just kind of drop the idea that somehow this was a tainted study by somebody who didn't know what they were doing. This was extremely well designed and executed. So what exactly did they do? How was the experiment conducted? So they sampled 876 ordinary Americans, right, from a national sample, and they divided them into two random groups. One group was given what they call the experimental treatment, and the other group was held as control, which is standard practice in every statistical study that we see. In the case of caste, the control group was given a fairly benign and academic description of the social hierarchy system that was found in ancient India. These are basically academic articles written by professors from Berkeley, Columbia, etc. And it contains language that describes the system in terms of varna, jati, and so on and so forth. The second group, the second random group, was given a text extracted from EqualityLabs, which is, of course, the author of the infamous caste in the United States study, quote unquote. And they extracted language from that, which described the caste system according to EqualityLabs. And so the experimental group, which means the other half of the random sample, was given this text to read and kind of digest. And after that, they were asked a series of questions that probed their attitude generally towards Hindus, towards the system, and so on and so forth. I mean, the details are available in the report, so I don't want to go into the details. And one of the key, and they did this across all three phases, I mean, both for religion, race, and caste, they described a very benign scenario, right? And then they had a series of questions on that scenario across the two groups, across the experimental group and the control group. And then they compared the results. And if one group had a significantly different result than the other, then you could argue that the material that they read influenced their response. Because in the absence of the material, the control group's response would be standard. Right? So when they did that, so the scenario that they gave is a highlighted text. They basically said, I mean, participants they read this line. Raj Kumar applied to an elite East Coast university. During the application process, he was interviewed by Anand Prakash. Ultimately, his application was rejected. This was all the information that they were given, right? Both groups were given exactly this, nothing less, nothing more, okay? So then they were asked to evaluate the scenario with a bunch of questions designed to probe. So if you can go to the next slide. And the results were kind of startling, right? So their analysis showed that the experimental group, the group that was exposed to the EqualityLabs rhetoric, was significantly more likely to perceive all kinds of negative aspects of this interaction. Now, if you think about the description itself, it simply says X was interviewed by Y and X did not get admission. That was it, right? But the experimental group were 32.5% more likely to perceive more microaggressions. They were 20% more likely to say the admission officer is biased against a lower caste Hindu. Right? So they projected onto the admissions officer a few things. They assumed he was upper caste. They assumed he was biased. They assumed that the applicant was lower caste. They assumed that he was facing more microaggressions. They even went to the extent of saying that by a margin of 11%, the admissions officer's decision was biased. Now imagine coming up with that conclusion based on that one-line description where X interviewed Y and X did not get the job. So this was the first, what I would call the startling finding, which the researchers found that people who were exposed to that text, in a sense, accepted it uncritically and were willing to project it onto a person who they knew nothing about, other than the fact they had a name, right? And to be very specific, they actually rotated the names, right? So that way, half the participants saw one Raj interviewing Anand, the other saw Anand interviewing Raj, and it made no difference. It was exactly the same. So that's the first takeaway, was exposure to the language that characterizes a group of people as oppressors makes what I would call neutral people believe that a group of people are oppressors. They actually believe it, right? And they act on it. They're willing to act on it. And it goes more than that. It goes much more than that. So if you go to the next slide, they actually perceived all Hindus as racist by a very wide margin, by about 40%. Right? So I want your viewers to kind of think about that for a second. People who saw an essay from EqualityLabs were 40% more likely to believe that Hindus are racist. And this is from a national sample of Americans, which means these are essentially people who don't really know anything about Hinduism per se. I mean, there might be some Hindus in there, but it was a proportional sample. And the right side of the graph is the other more alarming thing, which is by a significant margin, again by about 25 to 30%, they were willing to punish the admissions officer for what is essentially an imagined crime. Right? So they projected bias on the admission officer. They projected unfairness on the process. They projected microaggressions where there was no evidence of microaggression presented, and they were willing to punish the admissions officer on that basis. At this point, let me turn it over to Sudha. Now, this is basically what we have been telling throughout our fight on SB 403. We've been saying, you keep saying this, you keep presenting these quote unquote facts, and it's going to prejudice people, and there are targets going to be painted on our backs. And Sudha, what was your experience? What was the response? What was the response you got from these lawmakers?
Yeah, well, the California lawmakers, I've shared this before, all of us told us, we don't need data, we don't need proof, or we can make bad law any day, every day. But I want to say that every lawmaker, at least when the caste bill was going through in California, had received a package from the analysts from the various committees. That package included a lot of EqualityLabs information, and it included those unnamed victims of oppression, rape and all of that, with no name, no police reports. So when we try to explain to them, you really cannot make law that harms a lot of people. Like the report here said, the impression left from this exercise is that all Hindus are oppressive, right? It's not a few. It wasn't the admissions officer. And the funny thing is, I was just wondering, what if the admissions officer had a name like Sam Brown, an Indian, a Sam Brown? It would be different. It was just because it was a Hindu sounding name, everybody's impression is that all Hindus are oppressors. So this is the danger that we have been experiencing at the hands of people like EqualityLabs. And with the money and the influence they were able to secure, they had access into all of the institutions, all of the educational institutions and companies through the DEI program to come and teach the community on Indian caste system and the Hindu caste system. And you know what? That is why here I have Bahujan on my name. I mean, who cares what I am, right? I am an American. I should have the rights to live as a Hindu or a Buddhist or a Jain or whatever I want to, without having to call out that I am of certain tribal identity. We are doing that because that is how we are able to say, don't bring those labels on me. I am not an oppressor. And if you assume I am an upper caste, that is your problem, not mine. But the influence that people like EqualityLabs have cause so much harm and trauma in our community. Particularly, I want to point out the trauma that families have been facing from our children being alienated from their civilizational, from their cultural, from their faith roots, because they got attracted to the social justice aspect of what EqualityLabs was talking about, and they decided to be haters of the lineage that they came from, even though they didn't have any experience of violence or oppression in their own life. So a narrative like this can produce such harm. I mean, we came so close to being
Yeah.
designated as pariahs in society, right? I mean, thank you, Governor Newsom. I want to call him out again. Thank you for keeping us safe, allowing us space in a society like California. With almost 40 million people, we are just 500,000 right in California, but we contribute so much to the country and the state, and we don't ask anything from the state. We just say, allow us to be just like any other American. But so this academic study is extremely important, because that was what was lacking as a tool for us to bring to these places of influence and say, pay attention to data. You cannot go ahead and make law on emotion. You need to pay attention to data and actual facts that either decide for you or don't decide whether certain actions need to be taken. So I'm just hoping, the report also talks about a 2023 Pew Research study where 52% of the American workforce go through DEI training. And right. I can tell you personal experience of one of our community members from the East Coast who called me and said, Sudha ji, I have to attend a DEI training. I went to the first class. It was about discrimination, and the consultant who did this, her example was Hindu caste system. And besides me, there were few other Indians. We all felt terrible that this consultant chose to pick Hindu
Correct.
caste system as a discrimination in America without ever mentioning racial, gender, native people, none of those things. So so we discussed, and he went to the HR. HR had the consultant there, and HR said, okay, I understand your feelings and we will try to moderate it. But the consultant refused to change her curriculum. So you need to understand how inbuilt all of this is within corporate training and our educational system. That needs to be unraveled. Everybody should have a chance to stand up and be themselves and not be humiliated and excluded. DEI has become non-diverse, inequitable, and exclusionary. And that is a sad part. DEI is a great concept. It is not doing the job it was supposed to.
One question, Suresh, on your part. I have one question here. The sample size was even 876. To me, it seems a little low. Don't you think it should be at least in like 5,000 before you get a good sample? Because 50 states, right?
No. I mean, like I said at the beginning, 𝗤𝙧𝙤𝙀 has been doing this for very, very many years. And as a statistician myself, the national polls that we do, for example, on elections, samples are usually about 1,000, right?
I see.
So, yeah. So the sample size is never, in this case, the sample size is absolutely not a question at all. I think we should. It was an extremely well-designed experiment run by absolute professionals who know exactly what they're doing. So I don't have any questions at all on the methodology or whether or not it was done right. I have every confidence, given the prominence of the researchers who did this, that the methodology was absolutely flawless, no question.
And what time period was this study undertaken?
I don't know exactly when they did the study, but I think it was about early 2024. This was done in early 2024.
That's good enough for me, because why I wanted to find out that is, this comes to my next question. The methodology may be right, the sample size might be adequate, but when they were choosing caste, did they take into account that the equality report has been rejected by the judiciary in California? Forget about the SB 403.
It doesn't matter, right? No, I mean, from the experimental design perspective, it doesn't matter, because they were looking at the impact of DEI programs, and EqualityLabs has provided the most material for DEI programs on caste. Whether they were
Money man,
rejected,
if somebody's paid hundreds of thousands of dollars, they can produce whatever they want. I mean,
correct. So the research question was actually very relevant, irrespective of the quality of the materials, right? Irrespective of whether or not it's right, wrong, indifferent, it doesn't really matter. If I produce material X and it has an impact Y on the person, then that's a research finding. Then the next question you have to ask yourself is, does the material X deserve to be produced? Does it deserve to be shared? Does it deserve to be used? Right? So they are not, they do mention in the report, they do mention that the report has been basically taken apart by, by prominent research organizations like the Carnegie Endowment, and it's completely negated by Pew Research findings and so on and so forth. But their fundamental assumption is still valid. Right? This is the material that's being put in front of people as part of DEI, no matter what we think of it, and what impact does it have, right? And the impact is actually dramatic. The punishment I was referring to a little earlier, the punishment that people were willing to give was to fire the person. They were ready to fire this person over an imagined slight to two people who they didn't have any information on, right? And this is the startling aspect of it. And the researchers kind of get into it by saying, look, we've been studying authoritarianism from the right ever since World War II, right? But now we are finding the last 10 to 15 years that authoritarianism exists on the left too, right? It exists in programs like DEI, which tend to be very coercive, and they tend to demonize people who don't agree with their worldview, right? And this is a classic case where they are able to prove it with with a well-constructed study. So if we can go back to the presentation, I want to
yeah,
go to the really shocking material which follows. So as part of this research, they also added a question, right? They added a question which took 3 quotes from Hitler, literally from Hitler, right, and the Nazis. Replace the word Jew with the word Brahmin, and asked participants for their agreement with those statements. A absolutely mind-blowingly shocking 45% more likely to agree with the statement that Brahmins are parasites. 35% more likely to agree with the statement Brahmins are parasites. Brahmins are a virus. Brahmins are the devil personified. The experimental group was willing to go as far as to agree with Hitler's statements, Hitlerian statements about Brahmins. Now, why Brahmins, right? Why did we pick Brahmins? Because groups like EqualityLabs have drawn a straight line, have connected dots from caste oppression to Brahmins to Brahminism to Hinduism. For them, there is no difference between any one of these 4. They're all the same, right? So when somebody says Brahmins are parasites, given the connected dots, what they're essentially saying is Hindus are parasites, right? Brahminism is parasite. I mean, all of us will remember this famous picture where Jack Dorsey was holding up this picture called Smash Brahminic and Patriarchy, right? That's been a motto of EqualityLabs. If you look at EqualityLabs training, they keep going after Brahminical stuff. Brahmins are this, Brahmins are that. Brahmins have dumped violence on Dalits. Brahmins have done this. And Hinduism is essentially Brahminism. So when you have a study that says, after being exposed to this kind of rhetoric, people are willing to use Nazi language, literally Nazi language against that group, this has got to be alarming at so many different levels, right? So imagine we are all big into identity these days. Imagine if you identify as a Brahmin. You now really only have 2 choices. You either hide your Brahminical identity, or you come out with your Brahminical identity and be viewed as a parasite, as a virus, as devil personified. Even the NCRI researchers, who are not Hindus, not Brahmins by any means, they were blown away by the extent of the difference. Now, in statistical terms, 35.4% differential between 2 groups is massive. It's huge, right? It's well outside the margin of error. So this is not a what I would call a soft conclusion. This is a very hard result. Right? So when we look at the narrative that calls Brahmins as evil, Brahmins as Nazis, as 𝗤𝙜 𝗪𝙠 has done in her videos, Brahmins as the cause of all, desperate conditions of Dalits worldwide, as Brahmins this, Brahmins that. When Ajanta Subramaniam from Harvard writes an article, writes a book claiming that people who went to IIT Madras, the Brahmins, exercised their privilege and kept out all the non-Brahmins in IIT, right? When they create these narratives, they are, maybe they're not, but they have to be deeply unaware of the real threat they are posing to anybody who's perceived as a Brahmin, right? So, I mean, if you look at the three people on this call, to the average American, we all look alike. I don't think there's any way to tell the difference, right? If one of us is a Brahmin, then all three are Brahmins, as far as they're concerned, right? They can't tell the difference. They don't care. They may not come out and say it. Back of their mind, you're a parasite. You're a virus, right? And that's what this study is showing. It's showing that when exposed to that kind of a rhetoric, people don't bother to inquire into it. I mean, remember, these are average Americans that they recruited for the study, right? These are not, they didn't target Indians, they didn't target upper caste, lower caste, Dalit, nothing. They just wanted to find out how this rhetoric plays out in day-to-day America. And the answer is staggeringly scary. Is an average American is so easily swayed by this rhetoric that they are willing to agree with Nazi quotes about a group that they don't even know. How scary is that? Right? And so that's the part that kind of struck me as, wow, this is how bad it can get. So imagine if SB 403 had become law in California, and a caste discrimination case had been brought against any one of us in this call. How would we ever find a fair jury that doesn't believe we are somehow oppressors, parasites, whatever? Because inevitably, they're going to be presented with this quote unquote research from EqualityLabs, right? We know that because it was included in the Cisco case. Not only was it included in the Cisco case, a person who had clearly identified himself as an agnostic was deliberately named as a Brahmin. So here we have the dots connected, right? We have the proof that the EqualityLabs narrative causes people to be prejudiced against Brahmins with no reason at all, right? We also know that the EqualityLabs narrative was presented in that case, in the Cisco case. We also know that a defendant in that case was deliberately tagged as a Brahmin. There is no chance in hell that that person is going to get a fair trial, which is exactly what we were complaining to people about in SB 403. You guys are creating prejudice by sending out this information, and now this report is out there confirming it.
Sudha ji, I have a question for you. You mentioned that one consultant refused to change the question, but is this DEI consulting group, are these also companies like EqualityLabs, or they are also using the same material? Is there any connect between the two?
They could be, we don't know, right? And I also have another example where an employee at a company had an issue with the materials of the DEI consultant that was being used by her employer. And when she went to HR and said, this material is completely wrong, the DEI company was not in the United States. They were in UK, and they said, no, we are the authority on this. We will not change the material. Imagine how entrenched this topic is in one narrative only and no opportunity for others. That is extremely dangerous.
Yeah. You know the triangle that these DEI guys use, right? The caste triangle, where you have the Brahmins on top, then the Kshatriyas, the Vaishyas, Shudras, and then the Dalit. That triangle has been reproduced so many times across the world, starting from the BBC, starting from everybody uses that exact same triangle. After this report came out on Twitter, there were a couple of Twitter responses that put the diagram out there and said, oh, you guys are filthy pigs anyway, so why are you complaining? Right? So the level of Hindu phobia, the level of hatred that has been ginned up based entirely on that triangle, on that pyramid, is unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
And we have been saying for a very long time, guys, A, this is wrong, and B, this is going to create prejudice. Everybody brushed us off. And now guess what? We have evidence that it does create prejudice.
Textbooks
Yes,
have
indeed.
that, PG. Textbooks, school textbooks use that pyramid. And the curriculum, California curriculum requires, if you're teaching about Hinduism, you have to talk about caste system. And
Correct.
the textbook is about the pyramid. One more point, 𝗤𝙜 𝗠𝘠𝙗𝘀, when 𝗤𝗪 𝗠𝘂𝘀𝗿 became Twitter head, she said, oh, her tweet was like another Brahmin. So, these are clueless people.
She's an ignoramus. I'll tell you another reason. Her last name could be Dalit, could be somebody else, could be Brahmin also.
Yes.
This person has stunning, ignorance as far as Hinduism is concerned. She is using names to try and peg them as being this and this and this and this. And the fact that she got Agarwal wrong, she got her own last name wrong. So you would assume that somebody is going to make a report which is now being used as a reference by somebody else, that they would do their due diligence to find out, let me find out about my own last name. Look, this is gas, hot gas, in my opinion. And I have done a couple of episodes on how EqualityLabs was funded, 𝗤𝙧𝙤𝘆 Foundation. These are all corporations done with a malice. And I'll rest my case. It's been proven, guys. You guys can go and take a look at this stuff from PGurus. We've done a lot of stuff.
You've done a lot of good work. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And now this academic research helps us. I'm hoping more of it comes through. I think we need to use this NCRI report and send it to every company, including Cisco Systems, that added caste as a protected category.
Yes.
Their HR policies. We have to say, take it out. This report is academic justification now that you should not be engaging in excluding your certain population of your employees. The policy that you have today by adding caste exactly does that. Humiliates people who don't even have the legal status many times in the United States to stand up and protest.
Yeah,
Thank you so much,
saying
Sudha.
something.
No, all I was going to say was that I have a follow-up on this conversation. Will go, and viewers, I have a follow-up on this. Essentially, I'm going to capture what is the state of DEI implementation in various companies. You will get a little bit more information because there we are also trying to explain why some of the more established companies have actually completely dropped DEI. So all that is coming in a different hangout, but this one was important because of this stunning bias that is being displayed. And I can't thank you enough, Sureshji and Sudhaji, for coming and expressing your inputs. And you did the hard work. And I'm just asking questions. Asking questions is not that hard. But thank you so much. And viewers, please, this is important. I mean, one of the problems that I see for managers today, because there are many of them who worked for me when I was a manager, and then they have become managers, mid-level, high-level also. They get stressed out with HR hiring. They say HR gives us, this is off the record, I'm not going to take any name. HR gives us more pain than a non-performing employee. That is some of the vexedness that they're saying. I don't want to be a manager. I can be a principal engineer. I can go up the engineering chain and not worry about this stuff. Because it gets very, very stressful. I'm told in big companies where they are really trying to, HR is trying to, put some sort of an ironclad, like you said, right? This DEI thing, they say we are the authority, we are out of United Kingdom. We have seen that United Kingdom caste law, that BS.
Yeah.
I want to also say one thing. The report said, Joel Finkelstein, director of NCRI, said, this is not about freedom of speech. This is about civil rights. Extremely important for us to understand.
Yeah.
It is about civil rights.
Yeah, and I will add one closing thought. after this report, I mean, I would urge, like you said, I would urge all companies, IBM, Apple, all these guys who have put up their caste policies to read it. But the one thing I would say is, if after reading this report and after the publication of this report, if anybody gives so much as time of day to that EqualityLabs caste report, they're just encouraging and participating in encouraging Hindu hatred. There is no way around it. So think about it, guys. If you're going to platform that report anymore in any platform anywhere, you are absolutely pushing hatred of a minority. Think about that and let that guide your actions.
Thank you so much once again, Suresh ji and Sudha ji. And viewers, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to click on the bell button for notifications. Namaskar.
Namaskar.